Welcome to the final video in the user form series, and in this video we're going to put the finishing touches to what we've done. We've created a user form that allows us to add entries to a database, and in the more recent videos we've been creating this edit functionality so that we can easily edit an entry in the database. That's the focus of this video. How can we complete this edit functionality, get it all working smoothly and accurately, and therefore complete the whole task. So let's get into the spreadsheet file. And this is where we got to last time, being able to click this edit button, select somebody from the list, and then hit continue. And you'll see now all of the details are now populated in the user form. That's because between the videos I went back to the code and just completed it. So in the previous video, I think I did 3 or 4 lines of code. I just copy pasted those lines of code down, copy pasted down that line of code, put some tweaks in. It was a fairly straightforward process. I've done some testing on it too. So if you look at all of this, it looks like a lot of code, but in fact, with some copy pasting, some recycling, remember it's good to recycle code that you know works. It didn't take too long to put this code together, and it gives us this really nice functionality. Let's suppose we wanted to edit Elsie's record here at the bottom. So I can type in Elsie's name with this combo box, Elsie Green, and continue. We can see her details are in the user form now, so I'm just checking those through. 18 other North, employed, married, no children. This all seems to be accurate. So what we're looking to be able to do is make some changes here, and then for those to be able to click the continue button and for those changes to be incorporated into the database. So just for testing purposes, let's see what happens now. So we're going to hit the edit button again. Going to go for Elsie here, Elsie Green, continue. And then what happens now if I hit the continue button? Well, we can see we've got this validation check is popping up here. And this is exactly what I want to happen if I was adding a new entry. Let's just go into the Visual Basic Editor to see what's happening there. So our main user form here. So this is the code that's running when we're doing that, when we're clicking the continue button. It's getting to this validation check here. And this validation check is checking if the name already exists in the database, because if that's the case, we don't want to add a new name because that means the name will be duplicated in the database. So we've got to find a way to work around this. We do want the validation check to happen if we're adding a new name, but we don't want the validation check to happen if we're editing a current entry. So this is another coding challenge for us. So you may want to pause the video, look at everything we've done so far. We've got the user forms, we've got lots of code, we've got this module here that might be useful to us that's got some code in. Maybe pause the video and think how we might do that. How could we distinguish between if we're adding a new entry and if we're editing a new entry? So maybe you've had a think about that, and as always there's more than one way to do this. So we could do this using variables in the Visual Basic Editor, but I'm going to use the spreadsheet to give a sense of mode, so that Excel can understand if we're in add a new entry mode or if we're in edit mode, because according to which mode we're in, we want it to do a subtly different thing. So how can we give it that sense of mode? Well, again, one of my favorite coding ideas, which is combining together the spreadsheet and the Visual Basic Editor to get things done. So I'm going to designate a cell in the spreadsheet. I'm on the engine worksheet in the file, and cell B4 here, I'm going to use this cell to record the mode that we're in. How are we going to do that if we look at the code? Well, remember we have 2 very simple routines here. These are in the module. Remember we did create a module, we just got a little bit of code in there. Now these pieces of code run when I click the buttons, the add button or the edit button. The first thing these buttons do is they go to this module, and this module pops up, displays the user forms. So this will be a good place right at the beginning of the routine. This would be a good place to indicate what mode we want to operate in. So let's do that now. So we're talking about the engine sheet B4. So let's put that into the Visual Basic Editor. Sheets engine dot range B4 dot value equals, and let's say new, because this user form, this routine rather, is the routine that runs when we click the add button. So we could call this new mode because we want to add a new entry to the spreadsheet. That seems to make sense. And in fact, now in the engine, we can see it says new. That's because we ran that line of code once and it now appears on the worksheet in the spreadsheet file. So in the same way, this routine is the routine that runs when we click the edit button just here. So here we want to go into edit mode, and let's just test that now. Edit, I'm just going to quit this, and we can see in the back end this has changed to edit. Let's try for add again. Just close the user form and we can see, yeah, this seems to be working well. So now we've got a sense of mode, so we can use this cell, reference this cell that we're using, and reference that in the Visual Basic Editor to kind of subtly control what we're doing, because if we're editing an entry, that's different to adding a new entry. So we've got a way of distinguishing between the two of them there. So what do we actually want to do? Well, let's try editing an entry here. And just as I did at the beginning of the video, I'm going to go for LC Green, isn't it? Yeah, LC Green, who's at the bottom of the spreadsheet. So I'm now editing LC's record here, and say we want to change her age. Now, if I hit continue, we can see this validation check comes up, but I don't want the validation check to come up in this case. So can I say in the Visual Basic Editor, if we're in edit mode, then don't do the validation check. Let's give that a go. So remember, we're talking about when we hit the continue button in the main user form that we created. And here's the code that's going to run. So, and I know this is the validation check. Just going to put an annotation in there to remind me. So what can I do to make sure this only runs if I'm in new mode, if I'm adding a new entry? So how might we do that? Well, a conditional statement is going to help. And then I'm going to reference the cell on the engine sheets that we've used just to log a single word, and that single word is edit or new. So if this cell equals edit, I'll just go back to the cell in the engine, back to the engine, so it's cell B4 on the engine worksheet. So if this cell equals edit, then we don't want to do the validation check. So I'm going to say new is the word we're using to denote the new mode, adding a new entry. So if I put end if here, there we go. So this means that this validation check is only going to run if we're in new mode. So if we're in edit mode, it should miss out this validation check altogether. So let's give this a go. And let's test it first by adding an entry, and let's deliberately replicate an existing entry in the spreadsheet, so LC Green. So now I would expect the validation check to kick into action. We can see the validation check has kicked into action there. So let's go through edit mode and then LC again. Continue. We can see we've got the details populated. So if I hit continue now, I'm expecting something to happen. It should get round that validation check because we've put that conditional statement in, which means it only does a validation check if we're adding a new entry. So I'm expecting something to happen. It might not be what we want to happen exactly, but let's continue. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so it has added a new entry to the database. So that's not what we want to happen. We want to edit an existing entry. So why did it add a new entry to the database? Let's go back to the main user form into the code. And it's all to do, again, with position control. And we can see these lines of code here are controlling where in the database the new data is going to be added. And currently, it's configured in such a way that they are added at the bottom of the database because we're adding a new entry. How does that work? We've got this target row variable. It's in the first slot in the brackets of the offset command, so it's controlling how many rows to go down. So this is the variable we're interested in. So the next question is, where is that variable defined? Well, at the top here, the variable is defined in terms of the value on B3 of the engine sheet plus 1. So let's go and check that out. It's a bit like a detective story, just working back through a trail of evidence, if you like. So we've got 250 here. So this target row variable, which is controlling position, it's coming from the spreadsheet here. And we can see in the cell, there's a count A formula that's giving us the length of the database. So that's great if we're trying to add a new entry, but we're not trying to add a new entry in this case. We're trying to edit an existing entry. So we've got to control position with a bit more precision. And again, there's multiple ways to do this. You might want to stop the video and think, if we're in edit mode, how would we control position in a different way? But one way to do it, I'm going to go back to the user form we use when we edit an entry. One way to do it would be to try to make sure we use this value for target row. So we've got two different variables. They're both called target row. But in the edits, when we're editing an existing entry, we're defining target row in a different way. And you might remember how we defined it here. Rather than saying go to the bottom of the database, we're saying go to the line that contains the entry we're trying to edit. And we did that using a match formula in the Visual Basic Editor, worksheet function .match. So it would be great if we could get Excel to remember this value rather than redefining target row when it puts the information into the spreadsheet. We want it to kind of remember this value that we define here and then to use that value when it puts the information back into the spreadsheet. So how might we do that? Again, multiple possible approaches. We could do it just using variables in Visual Basic. I'm going to use the worksheet here. So how about we try storing this value as soon as we define the variable? Why don't we store this value in the back end of the spreadsheet, in the engine, so that we can use it later? So I've got cell B5 on the engine sheets. Sheets, engine, dot range, B5 dot value equals, and then I'm just going to use the name of the variable here, the variable. There we go. Okay. So let's run this code one more time. I'm expecting a value to appear in the engine here. So if I go to edit and then let's choose LC again. Let's not choose LC. That might generate an error because there's a duplicated record here. In fact, I'm just going to clear out this record now to avoid any unnecessary errors. Let's try LC again. I'm just going to hit continue. I'm not going to do anything else for now. Just going to close the user form. But now we can see in the engine because of the line of code that we just put in, this line of code here, we can see that in the cell in the spreadsheet, it's telling us the row that that entry is on. So we're now taking that information, storing it in the engine, storing it somewhere else in the spreadsheet. That means we can access it later when we're putting the information into the spreadsheet. So hopefully you're seeing how all of this is coming together. We've defined two modes, use the engine to define those two modes. And then we're saving, if you like, saving the piece of information about the row in the spreadsheet that we want to edit, so we can use that later. So the final step here is, remember, let's go back to the spreadsheet, just remind ourselves what we're trying to do. So when we hit edit, select an entry, we want to do some edits to this entry. But then when we hit continue, we want the entry to go into the correct row in the spreadsheet. So the last step is going to be to edit the code that runs when we click this continue button. So let's go back to the Visual Basic Editor. Data user form, double clicking the continue button. So this is the code that we're interested in. This is the code that we just need to tweak to get it working. So we've got to think again, as we did before, where is the code that gives us, that determines which row the data is going to go into? So it's clearly to do with this target row variable. That's the first part of the offset command. That determines how many rows we go down. So this is clearly what we're interested in, and we can see we are defining target row here. So let's take another conditional statement, because if we're in add new entry mode, we want to define target row one way. If we're in edit mode, we want to define target row a different way, because we want to go to a different place in the database. So how might we do that? Conditional statements. How are we going to determine which mode we're in? How might we do that? We have done that before. In fact, I'm just going to recycle this existing code. So if we're in new mode, then this line of code here, this is how we want to define target row. If we're in adding a new entry, we want target row to equal total entries in the spreadsheet. Remember, cell B3 on the engine sheet has a count A formula in that tells us how many entries are in the spreadsheet. So that's fine if we're in new mode. If we're in edit mode, so if we're not in new mode, would be another way to articulate that in a logical sense. Then we want to do something else with target row. Note that I've still recycled the same line of code. Just going to make a tweak to it now. Let's remind ourselves where in the engine we're storing this information. It's in cell B5 on the engine sheets. So I'm just going to say B5 dot value. There we go. So we've got B3 plus 1 if we're in new entry mode. If we're in edit existing entry mode, we're going to use the value in cell B5 on the engine sheet. I'll put some annotations in here as well to make things a little bit clearer for you in the download file. So let's just give this a go. I'm not entirely sure if this is going to work, but as always, let's just see what happens. So let's suppose we want to edit Elsie's record at the bottom here. So I'm going to select her from the bottom, and then let's say we want to just edit her age, make it nice and simple. We're going to hit continue. Okay, we can see what's happened there. That seems to be accurate. Let's try one more edit. Let's do Elsie again. Continue. And let's try changing her name this time. Suppose she's got married, she wanted to change her name. And let's give this one a go. There we go, that seems to have worked. Okay, let's go elsewhere in the database. Let's try Henry. I think we've mentioned Henry in this series before. Continue, and let's try changing, suppose he's had some kids, change children from yes to no. So Henry, so I'm expecting this cell here, cell K11, that seems to be, expecting that to change to yes, continue, and there we go, that seems to have changed to yes. So Yeah, if I was working on this on my own, I'll do some more testing. You should do some more testing yourself, but that seems to be working well. So this edit functionality seems to be working well. Now let's go back to the add functionality. Bear in mind, we have been tweaking the code a bit, so we have to test that the pre-existing functions that we had before, that they're still working accurately. So let's add a new entry to the database, Chris Tiger, this time, male, this will do. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Yeah, and that seems to be working well. I've got into the database at the end there. So there we've got a great example, quite a complex task there to distinguish between the two modes. Remember, we're still using the same user form, distinguishing between the two modes, but if you can get the different elements working together, and this is how I always try to explain Visual Basic coding, it's getting the different elements available to you in Excel working together. We've got two user forms there. We've got some buttons in the spreadsheet that are triggering some code. In the back end, in the engine, we've got some important information that's controlling what's happening in the code. We've got this list sheet that has some lists on. And then on the user form, we've got some buttons here too that are triggering code to get the information from the user form into the spreadsheet. So a really great kind of example of VBA coding, and certainly from an educational perspective, if you got to grips with this, and if you can create your own example, your own database, it's really going to give your VBA skills a boost, because there's so many different objects interacting efficiently with purpose to get a job done. So that's as far as we're going to go in this series. As I said, I really hope it gives your VBA skills a boost, and I hope you get to a point where you can use user forms to save yourself loads of time, really help you manage these databases efficiently. So that's it for now. Hope to see you in another video series on the channel.